Alright. Gabriel here. We got some more Tierlist action. Stygian Guard commons this time. You know, similar to Awoken, I don't think this clan's strengths are really defined by the common rarity cards. I would actually say they're almost equally as kind of weak. I don't know. They have two that are really powerful, I feel. You know, you can take your guess on which ones I think those are. But and my pick rate kind of reflects that. They're significantly higher than the rest of them. And then there's a lot that are, I think, just really bad, personally. You can probably take that with a grain of salt. I think there's probably ways you could make the cards that I consider bad actually work with some consistency, but just with the way I play, I hardly ever pick them. So there's a few cards in here that really have pretty low pick rates for me. So let's get into it here. The first one on the list, to me, is actually, just like a lot of these other ones, the best, actually. I think Crypt Builder is the most, well, I don't want to say the most takeable. It kind of depends. There are situations where I won't take a Crypt Builder, but if I can find any justification to take it, I take it. It's attuned, it does good base damage, and it's an offering target, and that's really all you have to know. If I started with Forgone Powers, this is just an auto pick for me. If I started with Spears, then I had to make more of a consideration. If I have Conduit Tethys locked in, it's still pretty much an auto pick. If I don't have Conduit Tethys, you know, if I have some other variant of Tethys, or especially if like I have Spears as the secondary, or Frozen Lances, I guess, I would say if it's the Ring 2 reward, I might not take it unless I really need it. Reason there is, if I take a Ring 1, I could probably find Offering Token with a decent rate on the second ring. You know, of the 8 pool, you know, you're getting 3 of the 8 usually, which is less than 50% chance that you find it, but it's also not like super low. It's enough that I would probably just kind of take it speculatively. Keep in mind also, Offering Token isn't the only way to make this work. Stuff like Titan's Gratitude and Drain, and more importantly, like Frenzied Swarm and Deep Offering are pretty good ways to make this card work. Also just, you know, a -2 Amber upgrade sometimes is good enough, or finding something like a Split Anvil. But this is the card that, you know, I used to pretty much like all of the Stygian spell damage cards at the common tier pre-DLC. I would almost, I might argue that they were all S tier for me. But now, spoiler alert, this is the only one that's in my S tier. And I might even say it gained on the other, like I don't even know if Crypt Builder was S tier for me pre-DLC. So I think it gained on the others while the other ones lost value in the DLC. The problem is, you know, we'll get to them as we get to them, but they just sort of don't really make the cut, I guess. It is what it is, though, isn't it? Anyway, drawing a blank here, so we'll go on. I don't know if I have much more to say on it. I mean, it deletes tanks from the game. The cards I'm looking to add to it are usually just piercing. Plus 30 is not too bad on it. It makes it do gigantic damage, especially like early game. That will kind of just one-shot bosses. Now the next one is probably controversial. This is one I just really don't like. Energy Siphon. I'm putting it in my D tier. I really never take it. I don't find that it really just is that impactful. Now, if we were talking like daily challenges, it changes. Like this is a pretty good daily challenge card for getting flying kills and whatnot. But you know, I don't know, for just standard Covenant 25, you could probably convince me that it's good. I just really never find it to be very good. It's often just so bad. You can't even like, it's not even one of those spells that you can add like a Surge Stone to like pseudo remove it. So It's not even that good of an incant card. It's 0 cost, but you have to have an enemy target. That doesn't really make the cut for me for like an incant deck. Now, granted, if you want to spend a lot of gold, you could probably double stack it, and it's a lot more worth. You know, that plus a lot of these spells, they end up being a little more enticing. But for me, I don't know. I find Energy Siphon often provides so little value to my decks, and I just never really want to pick it. And it's also just a high priority card for me to remove. I'd rather find other cards in my deck, you know. If you think about it, unupgraded, it just represents like playing another spell twice. I'd rather just draw the other spell, right? A lot of times you choose this and it just you're not able to combo anything with it because you want to play some AoE or random target spell, and it's gonna get popped anyway. And the next one I have on here, this one, I guess I'm putting it in the A tier. It feels B tier-ish for me, but when I looked at my pick rate, it's picked enough that it must be A tier for me, even though it feels B tier. I guess one thing I'll say about it is, you know, Stygian lacks for backline clear, to be honest. A lot of their stuff is either front-loaded or random target. Their only flat AoE in the game is a very high-cost card that if you don't have offering is a bit awkward, which is Titan's Tooth. So, you know, it does kind of solve a problem that often is tough to solve with Stygian, so I could see that making it pretty good. Though I will say it does have that awkward, you know, DLC World 3 damage problem, but it has the Frostbite to compensate for it, so it's not super useful if the enemy is on your floor that turn. You're probably not going to be able to kill them with Flash Freeze, even if you added a Piercing and whatnot. Early game you will, but not late game. But it does have the added benefit that it would still kill those backliners just with some simple plus damage, as long as you hit them before they get to your floor. So similar to like a Fracture or something, except it's much better than a Fracture, I would say. Typically just does more damage. It's also really useful, especially early game, but I would argue at all stages of the game just for putting stacking Frostbite onto bosses, especially flying bosses. You know, it's if you can justify it, it puts a pretty good amount. You know, if you can hit a Flash Freeze or two on a boss, you know, stack 16 Frostbite to him, maybe add a Foregone Power here and there, that's a significant amount of damage over time. You know, that'll add up to hundreds of damage if you play your cards right. Pun intended. It also has the added benefit of being able to self-sacrifice. I use it to kill imps, I use it to kill tombs. It's definitely useful for that. And that's pretty much Flash Freeze. You could probably argue B tier for it, but it does just kind of solve issues for me. And the next one, you know, I could probably argue A tier for it, but again, I don't know. Helico Chrysalis definitely was like an A or S tier for me pre-DLC. I really liked this card pre-DLC. And I especially liked it prior to the first, or the Stygian rework that like added attuned to things. This was one of the few spells that kind of gained a good benefit from adding spell damage. But, you know, as those came along, and then especially when the DLC came along, I feel like Helico Chrysalis has really fallen off. It's still an okay pickup early game if you need that big hit. Like, I don't know that I would straight up skip it if the other options were bad. Like, I would never put it at C or below tier, but, you know, pick rate wise and just how I feel about it, it does kind of fall to B tier for me. If you're not running some serious spell weakness, there's no way this is relevant for you late game. It's a 2-cost card that really does nothing for you, so it's like it's not that good of a card for your incant deck. And it just doesn't do enough damage late game to really do much for you. Even if you have like plus 30 on it, that's not even. Let's see, that's you know, 110 damage. That doesn't that matches just a simple plus 10 on a Crypt Builder. So I don't know. I don't really like Chrysalis that much, but I will say early game it definitely shines. It just really falls off by late game. It's not completely useless late game. Like I said, if you have like a Urchin Spines, or the Totem Fragment, the artifact that gives spell weakness at the top, or even Tether Scales, it can still remain relevant to the late game. But it does require that. You're not going to get enough damage out of it otherwise. It can't even put half the health worth of damage onto a tank late game. And that's not even factoring in the fact that you probably have to break a spell shield with it if it's not piercing. The next one, this is probably controversial. Maybe I'm throwing for content here, but I'm putting it D tier. Ice Tornado. This is one that honestly is probably S tier for me. This is probably one of the most crestfallen cards for me from like pre to post DLC Ice Tornado. It's, I guess what I will say is it's still okay early game, similar to Crystalis, but unlike Crystalis, which Chrysalis has, a chance to be relevant late game, I would argue there is absolutely zero, I repeat, zero chance for Ice Tornado to be useless for you, or there's a 100% chance for it to be useless for you late game, 0% chance for it to be useful. If you can change my mind on that, be my guest, but to me it's like, especially in the Divinity fight, but even outside of the Divinity fight, if you're taking the amount of shards that you would to go to Divinity, you're looking at just like enemies that often come with spell shield. If there's just simply sharding up some of these enemies gives them spell shield at the wave at least, and then on top of that, 20 doesn't even kill, I think, a Shadewing or a Purifier, so you would have had to add damage to this of all cards, which doesn't feel great to kill them. And then, especially though on Divinity, particularly on Divinity, it is just so bad. 3 random targets is just completely useless. It will never do anything for you in that fight, I guarantee it. And it costs 3, which is just too much. It's interesting because even, it didn't always used to be permafrosted, and I still liked it pre-DLC before the permafrost. I would put it at like A tier, and then once it had a permafrost, it became S tier, I would say, pre-DLC. But post-DLC, it's just so bad. So bad. I might be able to argue C tier on it, just because it does technically have a pretty decent early game. The fact that it's permafrosted means if you awkwardly can't play it because it was too much, it could get you through some of those early waves or boss fights. So it might deserve C tier for that, but the fact that it's such a dead weight come late game that you just have to remove it, I don't like it. I don't like it at all. And then rounding out the D tier here, we got Mollusk Mage. I think I have there's extra. I think Energy Siphon and Mollusk Mage. I could maybe put Ice. You know what? I'll put Ice Tornado to C tier. Okay, at least it's useful to me if I get it in my opening cards, right? But if I get Mollusk Mage and Energy Siphon, so many times they're useless. If you have Forgone Power, they're definitely useless. But even if you have the Spears, if that's your only damage, or I always call them Spears, Frozen Lances. Even if you have Frozen Lances, these are just so bad Ring 1 and Ring 2 and whatnot. But like especially like Ring 1, you just don't have any additional damage. They're so bad. Just so bad. Especially if you have one of those problematic combos like Tethys and Dregs, or Soulguard and Dregs. Having either of these cards is brutal. Especially Mollusk Mage. I don't know, using like Soulguard as an example, you have the Forgone Power, these do nothing for it, but also they can't help you with your incanting problem. At any path you take, you're going to want to incant. And say you go Titan Channel, Energy, or any of them really, like wherever you put them, like you may not even be able to play Energy Siphon, and then for sure Mollusk Mage does nothing for you. So I really have like a bone to pick with these two cards, but I also just think they're not that useful. I have had, but I will say this, I have had at least some runs where Mollusk Mage has done well for me. The infusion is not too bad. and sometimes it can occupy a space on the floor and be worth it. Like, I've had runs like that, but not enough for me to take it out of the D tier for just how bad it can, like how disappointed I am to see it in my opening deck. And it just accounts for like abysmal starts so many of the times. I really don't like the change they made. This didn't, if you weren't aware, Mollusk Mage wasn't always at the common tier. It was at the uncommon tier, and instead Titan's Tooth was at the common tier, and I miss those days. That was awesome. Like, you know me, I'm a fan of Forgotten Power. It was even more powerful back then because you had a chance, pretty decent chance to get, instead of a card that does absolutely nothing for you, you had a card that was amazing for you. Think of how powerful Titan's Tooth is early game if you can get it. Well, you could get it pretty consistent back then, and even outside of Forgotten Power, it was just really nice to have another target for like Offering Token or even Titan's Grat. I really think they were really good. And then the next one I have here is Offering Token. So if you look at my data, both Crypt Builder and Offering Token have a pretty big gap on take rate over the rest of these really. And also Ice Tornado, Mollusk Mage, and Energy Siphon are really low. I mean, I could still probably argue Ice Tornado into D, but I think for the simple fact that Ring 1 I'm okay seeing Ice Tornado, I will leave it in C tier. But Offering Token, it's one of those cards where there's really no downside, and the upside is just too good to ever just not take it. I might take another card over it, but I would never just straight up skip an Offering Token. That just seems wild to me. Even if you don't end up with an incant deck, it's still okay to have this card. It cycles itself on the turn you have it, which is rare. Yeah, you got to discard one, but that's very often just a positive for you, or at least neutral. It's very rare that discard is a bad thing. If it is, I think you're playing it wrong, because I can't think of the last time that it was really that bad for me to have the discard. It's a really good holdover target. It's a really good spell chain target. The both of them is amazing, especially if you have offering targets. Even if not, it's technically a addition to your draw. If it's on holdover, I should say. I mean, it is the turn you draw it is anyway, but using a holdover and spell chain example, it not only cycles itself, but if you play the spell chain copy, you're actually gaining a draw that turn, or every turn, I should say, for the low price of 1 Ember, and that's also 2 incants, or 3 to 4 incants, depending on if you could combo them with offering cards. So the ceiling's just so high, but also the floor is just pretty high for Offering Token, even if you never do end up holding it over, even if you never end up spell chaining it, even if you never end up with good offering targets. If you end up with an incant deck, it still's a decent card for incant. It's a 0 cost, and like I said, if the discard's not a downside, then that's pretty nice. I really like Offering Token. I think it's definitely one of the best cards that Stygian has to offer. Pun also intended there. And then rounding out the final one here, Titan's Gratitude. I think it's A tier. It's not a card I'm chomping at the bit to add to my deck, but the key thing here is just the fact that it is attuned. In the world we're living in, the DLC world, you kind of have to have, if it's some card that's targeting the front line, like a lot of these are, it has to be attuned. It has to. If it's not, it's not enough. It just isn't enough. Looking at you, Helico Chrysalis. But, Titan's Gratitude, the nice thing about it is it costs 1, so it doesn't need the setup that Crypt Builder often needs to find the value, but it can, in the same sense that Crypt Builder likes Forgotten Power, you might argue Titan's Gratitude doesn't like Forgotten Power, because then you're just adding another card that kind of discards the hand. So I actually like Titan's Grat typically more when I'm not running Forgotten Powers. But that being said, I'm not going to not take it if it's just the best card offered. Keep in mind, you really want that front-loaded damage, and if I have to take this, add damage to it, and remove some Forgotten Powers, that's fine. I'll bite the bullet and do that. It's a really nice card to put a Surge Stone on, I feel, because you're not and a lot of times you're not really needing to like recycle into Titan Scrat, but just a simple 25 Surge Stone makes it so that the turn you play it, you get a nice kind of just spike of damage that turn. You know, since it's attuned, that's 20 times 5, so it's like it's 100 damage extra, right? So 125 damage, not too bad for one cost that you only had to pay 25 gold to get to that point. But it's also pretty nice to put like piercing or the plus 30 on it, same as it is with Crypt Builder. I think the breakpoints aren't quite as good as Crypt Builder. You know, Crypt Builder with any significant upgrade will one-shot anything. Titan's Grat won't necessarily do that. It certainly will in the early to mid game, but late game, you might need to combo with some spell weakness to actually have it one-shot something. But it is also nice that it has that discard a lot of the time to combo with offering targets. I'm a pretty big fan of Crypt Builder, as you see here, but also Titan's Tooth. You know, there's only 3 offering cards, unfortunately, but I think Titan's Tooth is a very good card. The Guardian token, we'll get to the uncommons eventually, but I'm liking Guardian what is it? Guardian token? The one that discards and does 2 sap. I think they could probably stand to like unnerf it back to 3 sap, but I think at 2 sap it's still fine. And it's particularly good if you can double stack it, I feel, but I will say I significantly like Crypt Builder and Titan's Tooth better as offering targets. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Another thing that's, I would say, you know, just to tack on a little bit more here about Titan's Grat and Crypt Builder. Stygian Guard's a weird clan because they're supposed to be like the spell damage clan, right? But they don't have, so if you don't lock in some of these spells early that you only find the first 2 rings, you could go through a dry spell for the rest of the game, or at least large portions of it, because if you think about it, at the uncommon tier, there's literally only 1 spell that even actually does spell damage, and it's, I would argue, not that good of a spell either, which is Ice Storm. It's not a horrible one, but I don't think it's necessarily great, particularly for Divinity. So, you know, you kind of want to lock in these big front-loaded spells, even if it does have to be a Crystallis. Sometimes you need it. But especially Titan's Grat and Crypt Builder fall into that. It's like, even if I can't make it work right now, I might just have to take it so I have some sort of spell that does damage later on. And then there's obviously Ice and Pyre and Ancient Synergy at the rare tier, but there's only a 40% chance to see either of them, which is decent enough, but it's not like high enough that it's not out of the question that you don't find either of them in a given run. So that's going to do it for this one. Let me know what your thoughts are. My guess is this one may not line up that much with what other people think, but I'm pretty solid on it. I will say this, you know, just to toot my own horn here, I was surprised to see this, but Stygian is actually my best clan when I look at the last 3 months worth of data, or not since July. If I look since July 1st, Stygian is my best clan. And in particular, like Soulguard, I only lost 1 game, I think, if I remember correctly. But in general, just, you know, and that was with running Tethys Dregs a few times, which should have, you know, pun intended, dragged the win rate down a bit. Even with that, they're still my best clan, so I feel like I got a good game plan here, but it's not necessarily the de facto correct thing, right? I could definitely see arguments to changing this up. Pretty solid in my S tier, though. I do think those are S tier cards, but I could maybe be convinced on some of these C, D tiers being better. That'll do it for this one. As always, thanks for watching. Peace.